Hi, it's Ms. Parrott, and welcome back to AP Bio Exam Skills Series. Today we're going to be focusing on reading graphs in population ecology. In today's video, we're going to learn how to identify graph types and shapes, describe key data and trends, relate graphs to biological concepts, and most importantly, make predictions and explain changes. Big point earners on FRQs. Now we're going to be going over a lot today, so feel free to fast forward, take a look at the timestamps below, and fast forward to the part that most is important to you. All right, so what is population graph analysis anyway? Well, a population, if we recall, is a group of organisms of the same species in an area. So we're not looking at like Lotka-Volterra model predator-prey interactions here. We're just looking at one population in its environment. The key question that we're going to be asked is, how and why do population sizes change over time? The AP skills described in Unit 8 that it's going to require you to do is to be able to look at either a graph or a data table, describe data, identify specific data points, describe trends and patterns, and describe relationships between the variables, which is often, but not always, population size over time. All right, let's start just by comparing the most common exponential versus logistic growth. So exponential, we're going to follow our blue line here. You see, if this is population and this is time, this is how a population is going to grow under ideal conditions. Plentiful resources, plentiful space. You see a quick, maybe a doubling, a tripling, depending on what the organism is, every generation, and you'll start to see like a J-shaped curve, you'll see it called, and it'll just shoot up and keep going and keep going. Again, you'll see a steep growth curve and no limiting factors of any kind are present. The other type you'll see, if we follow our red line here, is logistic growth. In this is basically what a population is going to look like if density-dependent limiting factors like limited food, limited space, limited water is in the scenario, which is more like real life. So it starts exponential because there's plenty for everyone because the population is so low. But then as it approaches K, or the carrying capacity, then it will start to, it might overshoot and oscillate a little, but it'll eventually level off. So those are your main differences there. So how do we interpret data and trends? Well, I had a marker. Here it is. All right. Let's just look at a few of these questions and take a look at this graph. Here's our population over time in years. So it might ask us to describe the change in population from years 0 to 6. So from 0 to 6 on our x-axis, we see, so 0 to 6, that's exponential growth. We see a steep rise in the population. At which point are births less than deaths? So if births are less than deaths is a negative number, right? You're going down, so that's anytime you're going to see a negative slope. So maybe here we see a negative slope is going down, or here, so maybe around year 8-ish, right? What's the carrying capacity? Well, we could look at this graph. Carrying capacity, again, is going to be where the population starts to stabilize or come to equilibrium where births and deaths are equal. So for us, that's going to be around 800. Let's see. What's the population at 5 years? So that's asking about a specific data point. So here we would go to find 5 years. We would go up and then over. So if 400 is here, then that's going to be about halfway. That's about 200, 250. So one of your answer choices, that would be a multiple choice style question. One of your answer choices would be in that ballpark. Then it could ask you to describe a pattern. So in this case, we could say that we see from year 0 to 10 a logistic growth model, or an S-shaped curve, where we see increasing growth, like exponential growth from 0 to 6, and then it overshoots and starts to oscillate and level out at the end by year 10. What are the relationships between population and time? Well, you could say, so, right, that relationship between variables, you could say that the population is going to increase until it reaches carrying capacity, which in this case is 800-ish. And then what factors, density dependent, density independent, it might give you specific examples of each of those, would give you this shape of graph. So this is an important thing to remember. So in a logistic growth model where you see a leveling out, that's usually going to be due to density dependent limiting factors like limited food availability, habitat availability, space, water, etc. It's not going to be like a hurricane came through. That would be density independent limiting factor. So density dependent limiting factors result in a leveling off. All right, another type of population growth graph you might see are survivorship curves. And then it asks you about R selected strategists and K selected strategists. So let's look at this real quick. This also shows up in AP Environmental Science, so tell your apes friends about this as well. So in this case, the y-axis has the percent of organisms that survive, and then still time on the x-axis. There are three main types of survivorship curves. Type 1, which is here in the blue, type 2, and type 3. Now, on the exam, it could ask you, what kind of species, shows each of these types of curves? Or what strategy does somebody showing this, one of these curves, it may just give you one of those things on the graph. What strategy does it have? R or K selected. And then if you were going to put this into a population over time graph, what might that look like? So those are all things that you could think. You can think, if this graph is true, what could another graph look like? All right, let's start with the red or type 3 growth, which is R and R selected strategist. This isn't population growth. This is more about how many of that organism that are born survive over time. So as you can see, at early in time, there's a steep drop off. Like by halfway through this time, we're down to about 10% of our original population. So, but how many are born? A lot, right? So of those that are born, so these are organisms that are going to have high reproductive rates. Their population is going to grow quickly, so you'll see exponential growth. But they'll probably, most of them are going to die young, which is why you see such a low survival later on in life. Classic example of this is frogs, or I'd say just about anything that does external fertilization and just sprays out its eggs and sperm and they get together and fingers crossed that it works out. That's a very likely R-selected species. Whereas a K-selected species, which is more like your type 1 folks over here, the focus isn't on having the most babies and hopefully it works out. It's on putting energy and effort into a few high quality offspring and ensuring their survival to reproduction for future generations. So there's going to be like humans, elephants, larger mammals that have longer gestation periods. So here you can see of all that are born, most will survive to at least midlife. And then as they get older, then it starts to go down. That's your type 1 or K-selected species. This you're often going to find in a stable environment. Because again, you're not having a ton of kids. They have a lower reproduction rate. So we really need them to survive to carry on the genes to the next population. Whereas like here with our type 3 folks, they're going to have a bazillion kids and somebody's going to work out probably. Even if there is a hurricane or some pollution or something awful happens. So again, in type 1, that's our K-selected. Most will live to old age. Now, type 2, you may wonder, well, who does that? They have an equal chance of survival, kind of no matter how old they are. That's a constant rate of change. And that's the most classic example is some kind of songbird. And that's just true. So, birds, those are your classic type 2 folks. And they could show R or K selected strategy, but as far as their survivorship curve, you're going to see a type 2. All right. So, let's work an example together of something that you might see. This could be either any kind of a variety of multiple choice questions. It could be an FRQ, but they all come with the same strategy. The strategy is this. 1, first kind of make a claim about what's happening using evidence from the graph or the data table. And then connect the biological concept, like why is this happening, right? How and why is this happening? So in this example, we're looking at a hare population over 20 years. So here are our years, 0 to 20. This is our population here. So let's just go through sort of the main intervals of the graph, because that's an important thing to do. Look at inflection points or places where the pattern, the trend changes. All right. So if we look at 0 to 5 years, so from 0 to 5, we've got exponential growth. So what is that evidence is that we are shooting up. It's a steep inclined curve. And we could say births are greater than deaths. We could say that resources at this point are plentiful. That's making connections to the biological concepts. Then from 5 to 10, the growth rate slows, and then between 5 and 10, it kind of oscillates or wiggles back and forth around the 6,000 mark. So this could give us an indication that at this point in the hare habitat, 6,000 is the carrying capacity. So we can make that claim. Why? Because the population evens out and births and deaths are about equal at that point in the graph. Then we could say between 10 and 13. So if 13 is about between here and here, ooh, what are we seeing? We can describe, right? So we see a big decrease, right? Because population goes from about 6,000 to about 3,000. Now we could also make a claim that this big dip is not due to density dependent limiting factors like lack of space or food, but from some density independent limiting factors. So maybe deforestation, or we need to think about like, where do rabbits live, right? They live on the edges of like forests and fields and stuff. So maybe somebody put a neighborhood, maybe it's development, right? Somebody put a neighborhood in their field, right? So then, boom, but the point is it's density independent limiting factor. Maybe there was a tornado that came through and messed their habitat up. Who knows? But we have a big decrease. Then from 13 to 15, we see it come back up. So again, it's like a mini version of this first 0 to 5 exponential growth situation. So resources are plentiful, nothing major from the outside is happening, and so it's going to grow. But this time it stabilizes between 15 and 20 at around 5,000. So the carrying capacity of that area changed from 6,000 hares to 5,000 hares due to whatever happened, whatever density independent event happened here, in this 10 to 12 area. So claim, evidence from graph, biological concept connection. All right, here we are at the end. So real quick, common errors that kids make when doing the actual AP exam or practice. 1, mistaking exponential growth for logistic. So maybe they miss that logistic, like where it starts to level or slow down, or they confuse the oscillation for what they're used to seeing as a straight line. So be sure not to make that mistake. Then not paying attention to axis labels or units, because again, not every axis is population and time. Some are, but not all. Students often will describe trends like the population is increasing, but without making any biological ties to what is happening in the environment or the ecosystem that allows that increase to happen. As a teacher, ignoring the prompt is the most common mistake. Please read the question. Read the question. Read the full question and answer what it's asking. Don't just shotgun everything you know about logistic growth and then end up, even though you spent 20 minutes answering that FRQ, you didn't answer what it was looking for because you ignored the actual prompt. And then finally, common mistake is not identifying what type of factor, density dependent, which will cause a leveling off at carrying capacity, or density independent factor, which would cause like a big dip in a population. What kind of factor or a specific example of that factor could have caused the change you're seeing in the graph? So, pro tips, and the hottest one is coming to you at the end, so stick around. Take time to read the axes and the labels. That way you're sure to get the right units, because units is like a 1-point thing, ka-ching, in that FRQ grading rubric. Be sure to identify the curve shape and type. So maybe don't just say it's a J-shaped curve, say it's a J-shaped / exponential curve. It is steep and doubling and continuing to grow every generation. Note any plateaus. That's like where it flattens off, your carrying capacity friends. Inflection points, any point where the slope changes significantly, or overshoots, right? Because then that's going to give you an indication that something else big is going to happen next, and you can think about what is causing this change. Always relate changes to biological concepts. This could be births rate greater than death rate. Could be reaching carrying capacity. It could be some kind of limiting factor is influencing the population. And finally, if it asks you to predict or explain what you're seeing, be sure to link it to the correct mechanism. Again, is it density dependent or density independent limiting factors? And just practice. The more you can put pictures into words in any biology scenario, the better. Here's my super ultimate secret pro tip. So, AP Bio exam review books are really good at covering content, but they're not super awesome at covering these kind of skills. You know what it is? The ACT exam, the science section, is almost completely, can you read a graph? Can you read a data table? Can you read what scientists say and use claim, evidence, and reasoning to support one side or another. So getting yourself an ACT exam book will help you, exam prep book, will help you for the AP Bio exam even more than the AP Bio exam review book. That's my hot tip of the day. So if you found this video helpful, remember, please give this video a like, subscribe to this channel for more AP Bio exam skills, leave a comment, a question, or an emoji in the comments below. And if you're a teacher, check out my TPT resources at Know and Grow with Knowns. Keep learning, keep growing, and we'll see you next time.